Three beggar triplets are trying to sell a painting on the street. A billionaire approaches, and one of them says, "It's our mother's face. She's dying." He looks at the painting and freezes. It was his ex-wife. The triplets had been sitting on the cold sidewalk for almost 3 hours. June, Tessa, and Nora were only 6 years old, but they already knew the weight of worry. Every morning, since their mother had become too weak to get out of bed, they came to this busy corner in the heart of downtown. "Do you think someone's going to buy it?" June whispered, rubbing her small hands together for warmth. She was the most sensitive of the three. "They have to," Nora answered, adjusting the little painting propped against the wall. "It's the only way to get money for the medicine." Tessa, the quietest, simply watched the people passing by, most of them looking straight ahead, as if the three girls didn't exist. Selling the painting had been their idea. The night before, their mother had coughed so much that bloodstains appeared on the sheet. The medicine was gone, and so was the money. "Mum's painting is pretty," Tessa had said, pointing to the small portrait on the bedroom wall. "People pay for pretty things." They didn't even ask for permission. Early in the morning, before their mother woke up, they took the painting and left. What else could they do? Now sitting on the sidewalk with a few other small objects scattered in front of them, an innocent attempt to look like a street vendor stall rather than three children begging, they waited. The painting was in the center, depicting a young, beautiful woman with large, lively eyes. She looked nothing like the pale Han-weak version who now slept most of the day. "Look at that man," June nudged. A tall man in a dark suit was walking quickly along the sidewalk. Unlike the others, he seemed to notice the girls. For a second, his eyes landed on the painting. "Let's call him," said Nora, the boldest. As the man passed by, Nora impulsively stood up. "Sir, would you like to buy our painting? It's really beautiful." Mark Sullivan was late for an important meeting. As the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, his minutes were worth millions. He was about to walk straight past when he heard the child's voice. He slowed down, more out of reflex than real interest. "It's our mother's face. She's dying," the girl continued, urgency in her voice. "She's sick. We need money for her medicine." Mark looked down. 3 identical girls, dark hair, wide eyes, clothes far too thin for the chilly weather, triplets. They looked so small and vulnerable that something tightened in his chest. Out of politeness, he looked at the painting the girl was holding, and then the world stopped. His steps froze on the sidewalk. The air caught in his lungs. The crowds, the noise of the city, everything disappeared. In the small painting, rendered with gentle brushstrokes, was the face of Anna Pierce. Anna. His Anna. It couldn't be. But the real shock came when he recognized the brushstrokes, the style, the colors. This wasn't just any painting of Anna, it was his painting. He himself had painted it years ago, back when painting was more than a forgotten hobby, when they were still together, when the future looked so different from what it became. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. The girls looked at each other, confused by his reaction. "It's our mom's," answered the one who had spoken before. "It hangs in her room, but we took it to sell. She needs medicine." Mark took the painting with trembling hands. There was no doubt. It was his. The same soft smile of Anna, the same intense eyes that had looked at him so many times. The woman who'd left his life nearly 10 years ago. "Your mother," he began, trying to process the situation. "What's her name?" "Anna," said one of the other girls. "Anna Pierce." The last name hit Mark like a punch. It was really her. And these girls, now that he looked closely, it was impossible not to see it. The same eyes as Anna, the same shape of face. 6 years old. The timeline matched perfectly. An impossible idea began to take form in his mind. "How much do you want for the painting?" he asked, already reaching for his wallet. 50, said the most confident girl, lifting her chin. "It's really pretty." Mark pulled out all the cash he had, several $100 bills. "Here," he said, holding out the money. "I want to buy the painting." All 3 girls' eyes went wide at the same time. "That's a lot of money," one of them whispered. "It's okay," Mark replied, still looking at the woman's face in the painting. He held it against his chest, feeling a surge of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. 1,000 questions exploded in his mind all at once. Was Anna sick? How bad was it? Were these girls his daughters? Why hadn't he ever known? "Where do you—" he began, raising his eyes. But the words died on his lips. The sidewalk was empty. Mark spun around, looking in every direction. The 3 girls had vanished. How was that possible? It had only been a few seconds since he'd given them the money. Children that small couldn't have just blended into the crowd so quickly. "Hey," he called out, taking a few quick steps, searching the passing people. "Girls, wait!" Nothing. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air. Mark looked down at the painting in his hands, still in disbelief. Anna's face smiled back at him through the brushstrokes he himself had painted so long ago. A painting he thought he'd never see again. Right there, in the middle of the busy sidewalk, billionaire Mark Sullivan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: helplessness. The girls had vanished, taking with them the secret of where Anna was, how she was, and what had happened over the last 10 years. But as he stared at the painting, a certainty grew inside him. That encounter couldn't have been a coincidence. Fate had placed those 3 girls, possibly his daughters, in his path, and he wouldn't rest until he found them again. Until he found Anna. Mark entered his penthouse apartment and tossed his suit jacket over the sofa. The city sparkled below through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a $50 million view that, at that moment, meant absolutely nothing to him. He hadn't gone to his meeting. He didn't even call to cancel. For the first time in years, Mark Sullivan simply ignored his obligations. The dozens of missed calls on his phone proved it, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He sat down in a dark leather armchair, the painting balanced on his legs. For almost an hour, he stayed there, unmoving, just staring at the image he himself had created so long ago. Anna Pierce. It was as if a floodgate had burst inside him. Memories he had buried deep in his mind 7 years ago began to surface one after another. Anna laughing while he tried unsuccessfully to prepare a surprise dinner. Anna asleep on the old sofa in the apartment they shared, a book still open on her chest. Anna whispering, "I love you," for the first time, her eyes filled with that sincerity he never found in anyone else again. Mark suddenly stood up and went to the bar. He poured himself a whiskey and drank it in one gulp. The liquid burned his throat, but it didn't ease the tightness in his chest. He returned to the armchair and picked up the painting. He turned it over, examining the back. It was a bit worn, but he recognized his own signature in the lower right corner, along with the date. 7 years ago, almost exactly. Mark closed his eyes, allowing himself to be carried away by the memories. It had been one of the first paintings he ever did. Back then, he was just an entrepreneur with a promising startup, far from being the billionaire he would become. He lived in a modest apartment, drove a used car and painted on weekends because it calmed him. And Anna was peace. She would come home from her job at the public library with a book under her arm and stories to tell. She made coffee while he painted. Sometimes she just watched, silently, as if she could see everything he was just by observing how his hands moved across the canvas. They didn't have much, but they had peace, and that seemed enough until it wasn't. Mark opened his eyes and looked at the painting. He had painted Anna on that sunny Sunday when she was reading by the window. The light hit her face in a way that fascinated him. He asked her to stay still, and she joked that she would, as long as he promised not to take too long. It ended up taking hours, but she didn't complain. It was around that time his company started to take off. The first big contract, the first really important investors. Mark began to move in more elevated circles, dinners in luxurious homes, meetings at exclusive clubs. That was also when his family started getting interested in his life again. The same parents who had questioned his decision to abandon a safe career in corporate law to risk everything as an entrepreneur suddenly saw potential in their son. But they didn't see the same in Anna. "She's not part of our circle, dear," his mother had said during one of the Sunday lunches at the family estate, as if that explained everything. "Public library," his father had commented with a slight raise of an eyebrow. "Interesting career choice." Mark sighed, staring at Anna's face in the painting. It was never explicitly stated, but always hinted at. Little comments, silent glances, the way his mother forgot to include Anna on family event invitations, how his father could never remember her job or where she'd studied. And worst of all, how Mark gradually let it happen. He left Anna at home while he went to important dinners. "It's just business, you'd be bored," he'd say. He stopped telling her about new contracts and company directions. "I don't want to bore you with technical details." He started painting less. "No more time," he'd say. But the truth was, he had chosen a path where art had no place, where maybe Anna didn't fit either. And of course, she noticed. Anna was always perceptive. "You've changed," she said one night after he arrived home late from yet another corporate event. "I'm just tired," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "No, you're distant. It's been a while." He didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. 2 weeks later, she left. Mark came home from work and found only a note on the table. "You chose your path. I hope you find what you're looking for." No drama, no accusations, no fights, just the silence that remained after she walked out the door. And the worst part? He let it happen. He didn't run after her. He didn't call. He didn't search. A part of him, the part too busy building an empire, actually felt relief, as if Anna were a reminder of the Mark he no longer was. The Mark who painted on weekends and was content with a small apartment and simple dreams. Mark stood up again and went to the window of his penthouse, 50 floors above the city. The higher he climbed, the smaller everything below appeared. People became tiny, problems remote. He had achieved everything he wanted, built one of the most valuable tech companies in the world. He was respected, admired, envied, and completely alone. He returned to the armchair and picked up the painting again. Anna seemed to look right at him. The same eyes he'd seen today, multiplied by 3 in those little girls on the sidewalk. Girls who might be his daughters. A thought hit Mark like a blow. Anna had left 7 years ago. The girls looked about 6. The math was simple. Could it be Anna left without knowing she was pregnant? Or worse, knowing, but choosing not to tell him? Either way, everything made sense now. The painting he himself had done. The girls with Anna's eyes. The time that had passed. Anna was somewhere in the city. Sick, according to the girls. With 3 daughters dependent on her, 3 daughters who might very well be his as well. Mark placed the painting on the coffee table and picked up his phone. He cancelled all his appointments for the next few days. For the first time in a decade, something mattered more than his company, his fortune or his reputation. He had to find Anna, and for that, he first had to find those 3 little girls who had vanished like smoke on that busy sidewalk. This time, he would go after them, and he wouldn't rest until he found the truth. Mark spent the next morning walking around downtown. He wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans and a simple jacket. He didn't want to draw attention. He just wanted to find 3 little girls who had disappeared like smoke. The painting was safe in his apartment, but he couldn't stop thinking about Anna and the triplets. The resemblance between them was undeniable. The same eyes, the same face shape, even the slight tilt of the head when they were suspicious. As he walked through the crowded streets, Mark wondered what he would say if he found them. How would he explain his presence? How would he ask about Anna without scaring them away? The night before, he had considered hiring a private investigation team. With his money and influence, he could have detectives scouring every corner of the city within hours. But something stopped him. Something told him he needed to do this personally. It was almost noon when he returned to the corner where he had first seen them. No sign of the girls. He asked some street vendors if they knew 3 identical sisters who sometimes sold things on the sidewalk. Most just shook their heads. Some looked suspiciously at the wealthy man searching for children. For the next 4 hours, Mark explored the surrounding streets. He entered small shops, asked in plazas, watched playgrounds. Nothing. As the sun began to set, he was about to give up for the day. That's when he heard it. Childish laughter coming from a narrow alley between 2 old buildings. Mark stopped. He listened again. It wasn't just one laugh, several were mixed together. He cautiously approached the alley and peeked in. There they were. The 3 girls were playing in a small sheltered space between large trash bins. They had built a kind of makeshift house out of cardboard boxes. They were using bottle caps, arranging them in rows as though they were people or animals. Mark watched for a moment, hardly breathing. They looked so small and vulnerable there, yet there was a resilience about them, a strength that children so young shouldn't need to have. He took a step into the alley. A piece of broken glass cracked under his shoe. All three heads snapped up at the same time, eyes wide and alert. "Hi," he said, keeping his distance. "Remember me?" They didn't answer, but they didn't run either. They just watched him with those large, identical eyes. "You sold me a painting yesterday," Mark continued, his voice soft. "A very special painting." "You're the rich guy," one of them finally said. Mark guessed it was Tessa, the middle one, but he wasn't certain. They looked so alike. "Yes, that's me." "Why are you looking for us?" asked another one, probably June Daksha with the gentler tone. Mark paused for a second. The truth seemed the best option. "I knew your mother," he said simply. The three of them exchanged looks. That silent communication only siblings have. One of them, definitely Nora, the most serious, took a step forward. "Why?" she asked, her voice far too steady for a 6-year-old. "Why what?" Mark echoed, confused. "Why did you know our mother?" The question caught him off guard. It wasn't how or when, but why, as though there had to be a reason to know Anna, as if she was someone people like him normally wouldn't meet. "Because she was important to me," he answered honestly. The girls exchanged looks again, still wary, but maybe a little less so than before. "Do you always play here?" Mark asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Nora shrugged. "Sometimes. Do you live nearby?" No response, just those cautious gazes. "Does your mother know you're here?" He tried again. "She's sleeping," June said. "The medicine makes her sleep a lot." Mark nodded, feeling a pang in his chest. "Did you buy the medicine with the money I gave you?" "We gave it to the pharmacy man," Tessa replied. "He said it was a lot." "He gave us change," Nora added. "We kept it for next time we need medicine." Smart and responsible, at 6 years old. "What's wrong with your mum?" Mark asked, trying not to sound too anxious. Again, silence. The three just watched him, as if deciding whether he deserved to know. "Have you eaten today?" Mark changed the subject, noticing how their clothes seemed far too big for their thin frames. June shook her head. There was nothing at home. "We were going to buy bread later." Mark glanced around, thinking fast. "There's a sandwich place on the corner. Can I buy you something to eat?" The three exchanged looks again. Hunger clearly wrestled with distrust. "We don't go with strangers," Nora said firmly. "I wouldn't ask you to," Mark replied quickly. "You can wait here. I'll go there, buy the sandwiches and bring them back." More glances passed between them. Finally, Nora gave a small nod. "Okay. How do you like your sandwiches?" "Anything," Tessa replied. "No onions," June added. "We don't like onions," Mark smiled. "No onions. Got it. Shall I be right back?" He walked to the sandwich shop, always looking back to make sure they wouldn't run away. He bought 3 large sandwiches, sodas, fries, and some sweets. Maybe it was too much, but he had a feeling these girls hadn't seen a complete meal in too long. When he returned to the alley, he feared they might have left. But there they were, sitting in their cardboard fort, waiting patiently. Mark approached and handed them the bag of food. Nora took it, still cautious, and checked the contents before distributing it among her sisters. The three ate with a hunger that confirmed his suspicions. They were very, very hungry. "Do you come here every day?" he asked, sitting on a crate a safe distance away. "Not every day," Tessa answered between bites. "Only when Mom sleeps too much." "Is your home far from here?" Nora looked at him, eyes so similar to Anna's, filled with caution. "We can't tell strangers where we live." "You're right," Mark agreed. "Your mother taught you well." They continued eating in silence for a while. "What are your names?" Mark finally asked. They exchanged glances. "I'm Nora," said the serious one after a pause. "Tessa," said the one in the middle. June completed the third, a bit more cheerful than the others. "I'm Mark," he replied. "Mark Sullivan." No reaction to the name. Perhaps Anna had never spoken of him to the girls. "Do you go to school?" He tried another approach. "We study at home," Nora said. Mum teaches us, June added. She knows a lot of things from books. Mark smiled. That sounded like Anna. When they finished eating, the girls looked a bit more relaxed but still distant. He knew he shouldn't push too hard. I need to go now, he said, standing up. But can I come back tomorrow, maybe bring more food? They exchanged another one of those silent sibling communications. Okay, Nora finally said. We'll be here. Mark nodded, feeling something strange in his chest. A small start of a connection, as fragile as a thread of silk, but it was real. Thank you for talking to me, he said. See you tomorrow then. As he walked away, Mark glanced back one last time. The three were standing together, watching him go. They didn't smile or wave, but they also didn't run. They simply stayed there, present. And for Mark, that presence, that refusal to flee, that small thread of trust, meant more than they would ever know. Over the next 2 weeks, Mark returned to the alley every day, always at the same time, always with fresh food and some small gift. Nothing expensive or flashy. He quickly learned that would only make the girls more suspicious. Simple things, colored pencils, a storybook, 3 identical teddy bears, apart from the color of their bows. On the 3rd day, June smiled at him when he arrived. On the 5th, Tessa told him about a bird that built a nest near their bedroom window. On the 8th, even Nora, the most cautious, asked if he would be coming back the next day. Mark cancelled meetings, delegated responsibilities, ignored calls. His assistant was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but he didn't care. For the first time in 7 years, something was more important than his company, his wealth, his image. The girls rarely spoke much about Anna. When he asked, the answers were vague. She's a bit better today. The doctor came yesterday. She said she'll be well soon. He didn't press. He knew he had to go slowly, earn their trust one day at a time. On the 10th day, Mark brought ice cream. The 4 of them sat on the ground in the alley, each with a popsicle, and June asked, "Why do you come here every day?" Mark hesitated. The 3 looked at him with those identical eyes, Anna's eyes. "Because I like seeing you," he answered honestly. "Is that all?" Nora insisted. He took a deep breath. "And because I really want to see your mother again." They exchanged looks, that silent communication again. "Were you her friend?" Tessa asked. "I was more than a friend," Mark answered, deciding to be honest. "I loved your mother, very much." More exchanged looks. "Then why aren't you together?" June asked directly. Mark looked at the popsicle melting in his hand. "Because I made a mistake, a big mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Nora insisted. I didn't take care of her the way I should have. I wasn't by her side when she needed me." The girls stayed silent, absorbing that information. "Mom gets sad sometimes," Tessa said suddenly, "when she thinks we're not watching." "And she cries when she thinks we're asleep," June added. Mark's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry," he said, and he truly was. Nora, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Do you want to say sorry to her?" "Yes," Mark replied, "and so much more." Another long moment of silence. "We can take you," Nora said at last, after another one of those sibling glances. "Not today, tomorrow." Mark felt his heart race. "Really?" "But you have to promise one thing," Nora continued, sounding too grown-up for a 6-year-old. "What?" "If she doesn't want to see you, you have to leave and never come back." Mark swallowed hard. It was fair. "I promise." The next day, Mark arrived at the alley earlier than usual. He had hardly slept, anxious about seeing Anna after so long. What would he say? How would she react? Was she really as sick as the girls suggested? The triplets showed up right on time, looking as nervous as he felt. "You really came," Nora said, as if part of her expected he wouldn't. "Of course I did." "We told Mom about you," June said. Mark's heart nearly stopped. "And what did she say?" "Nothing," Tessa replied. "She got quiet. Then she said we shouldn't talk to strangers." "But we explained you're not a stranger," June added. "You bring food and gifts. And you don't do bad things," Tessa said. Mark tried not to show his nerves. "So she knows I'm here, that I'm going to visit her." All 3 shook their heads in unison. We didn't tell her that part, Nora said. It's going to be a surprise. Mark wasn't sure this was the best plan, but he had no choice but to trust the girls. So, where are we going? Home, June answered simply. It's not too far. The three started walking, and Mark followed. They left the alley, turned a few corners, and entered streets that became increasingly run down. The bright city center was left behind, replaced by older, visibly poorer neighborhoods. After about 20 minutes, they reached a 3-story building that looked old and worn. The exterior paint was peeling, and some windows were patched with tape. We live here, Tessa said. Mark looked at the place, trying not to show his shock. It was a boarding house, but not a good one. The kind of place people lived in when they had no other options. The girls went inside, and he followed. The entry hall was dark and smelled of mold. A narrow stairway led to the upper floors. Second floor, June explained, starting to climb. Mark felt his heart pounding harder with each step. After 7 years, he was about to see Anna again. Anna, who might have led a very different life if he had made different choices. Anna, who lived in this sad place with 3 small daughters. Anna, who was sick. On the second floor, the girls stopped in front of a door with the number 207 painted awkwardly. It's here, Nora whispered. Mom should be awake now. June gave 2 soft knocks. Mom, it's us. A weak voice answered from inside, and Mark's heart almost stopped at recognizing it, even after so long. Come in, girls. June turned the doorknob and opened it. The 3 stepped in, but Mark stayed in the hallway, heart hammering against his ribs. We brought you a surprise, he heard Tessa say. What is it, honey? It's a person, June answered. A person who... That's when Nora came back to the door and looked at Mark. She gave a small nod for him to enter. Mark took a deep breath and stepped forward, entering the small apartment. And there she was. Anna was sitting in an old armchair near the window. A book lay open on her lap. She was thinner than he remembered, with dark circles under her eyes and shorter hair. But it was still her. She still had those eyes that seemed to see right through him. For a moment, Anna didn't seem to comprehend what she was seeing. Then her expression changed, surprise, shock, and then a mask of coldness. You. The word came out almost like a sigh. Yes, Mark replied, his voice rougher than he intended. The girls were looking from one to the other, wide-eyed, trying to understand what was happening. So you thought you could just show up like nothing happened? Anna asked, her voice harder than he'd ever heard it. No, Mark said. But I needed to see you. The girls brought us Jez, Nora informed, as though it was important to clarify who was responsible. Girls, Anna said, still not taking her eyes off Mark. Go to your room, please. But, Mom? June began. Now. The 3 looked at Mark, hesitant. He gave a small nod, and they left, closing the door to the bedroom behind them. The silence that followed was dense, filled with 7 years of absence. What are you doing here? Anna finally asked. I found the girls on the street. They were selling a painting. One I painted. Something changed in her face, a brief flicker of vulnerability, quickly masked again on, so what? You thought that gave you the right to come back. Anna, you left me alone, Mark, she interrupted, her voice low but firm. And now what do you want? To ease your conscience? Mark took a step closer, but stopped when she raised her hand. No, she said, don't come any closer. Anna, I just want to help. The girls said you're sick. You can what? She scoffed. Of course you can. You became the big-shot businessman you always wanted to be, right? She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. The small, worn apartment said it all. Please, he tried again. Let me help, for the girls' sake. Anna studied him for a long moment. In her eyes, Mark saw anger, hurt, exhaustion, but also something else he couldn't name. Go away, she finally said. Now. Mark felt his heart sink. But he had promised the girls, if Anna didn't want to see him, he'd respect it. All right, he agreed. But if you change your mind. He left the sentence hanging, pulled a card from his pocket, and set it on the small table by the door. My number, anytime. Anna didn't reply. She just sat there, staring at him with the same eyes that had once been his entire world. Mark turned and left. In the hallway, he still heard the door close behind him, but he didn't hear the sound of the lock turning. Anna had closed the door, but she hadn't locked it. Mark spent the night wide awake. In his luxurious apartment, overlooking the entire city, he paced back and forth like a caged animal. He couldn't get the image of Anna out of his head, so thin, so pale, yet still with that gaze that disarmed him completely. And the girls. 3 little ones with their mother's eyes and, he was now almost certain, his stubborn chin. There was no denying it anymore. The triplets were his children, children he never knew he had, children who grew up without him. While the city slept below, Mark made a decision. He wouldn't be pushed away again, he wouldn't back down. No matter how much Anna resisted, he needed to be present now. For the first time since founding his company, Mark called his VP and announced he was taking an indefinite leave of absence. "Is everything all right, Mark?" The worried voice came through the line. "No," he answered honestly, "but it will be." By 8 in the morning, he was back at the rundown boarding house. He had stopped at a cafe on the way, buying coffee, hot chocolate, bread, pastries, and fruit. Enough food for 4 people, but he suspected Anna and the girls hadn't been eating properly for a long time. He stood in front of door 207 and took a deep breath before knocking. After a few seconds, the door opened just enough for Tessa's eye to appear in the gap. "Hi, Tessa," Mark said, trying to smile. "I brought breakfast." She looked at the bags in his hands, hesitant. "My mom doesn't want to see you," she said quietly. Mark nodded. He'd expected that. "That's okay. Just tell her I'm not leaving until she hears me out." Tessa studied him a moment, then closed the door without another word. Mark placed the bags of food on the floor near the door and sat down in the hallway, leaning against the opposite wall. He'd brought a book, but couldn't focus on reading. Every minute felt like an hour. After some time, the door opened again. This time, June peeked out. She looked at Mark sitting on the floor, then at the bags. "Can I get the food?" she asked softly. "Of course," Mark replied. "It's for you." The girl grabbed the bags quickly and shut the door again. Mark stayed put. An hour passed, then 2. He checked emails on his phone, replied to a few urgent messages, but didn't budge. Around 11, the door opened again. All 3 girls emerged, watching him curiously. "You're still here," Nora said, sounding surprised. "I told you I wouldn't leave," Mark answered simply. "Mom said we can go play in the courtyard downstairs," Tessa informed him. "Are you going to stay here the whole time?" "I am." They didn't seem to know how to react. In their experience, adults rarely kept their promises. "Why do you want to see Mom so bad?" June asked. Mark thought for a moment. How to explain something so complex to 6-year-olds? "Because I made a mistake a long time ago and I want to fix it." "What kind of mistake?" Nora persisted. "I left your mom alone when I shouldn't have." They exchanged another look. That silent connection. "We'll be back later," Nora said finally, and the 3 headed down the stairs. Mark remained there, seated in the dimly lit hallway. Around lunchtime, he heard movement inside the apartment. Someone, likely Anna, moving around. He wanted to knock, to try again, but he resisted. Patience was key now. By about 2 in the afternoon, the girls returned. They looked like they'd been playing hard. Their hair was messy and their clothes were smudged with dirt. "You're still here?" Nora asked, lifting an eyebrow in a way that reminded him so much of Anna it almost hurt. "Still here," Mark confirmed. "We're hungry," June stated outright. Mark smiled and stood up for the first time in hours. His back ached from sitting on the hard floor. "I can get you something. What do you want to eat?" They exchanged glances again. "Pizza," Tessa finally said, and the other 2 nodded enthusiastically. "Pizza it is," Mark agreed. "But for 4, your mom needs to eat too." The girls didn't object. Mark made a quick call, and 20 minutes later, a confused delivery person arrived at the rundown boarding house with 3 large pizzas. Mark paid and handed the boxes to the girls. Nora took them while June opened the apartment door. Before entering, Tessa turned back. "Thanks," she said timidly. "You're welcome," Mark replied. "After you eat, Please tell your mum I'm still here, that I won't leave until I talk to her." Tessa nodded and shut the door. Mark returned to his spot in the hallway. Afternoon turned into evening. The hallway grew even darker, lit only by a weak bulb at the far end. Other tenants passed by occasionally, eyeing the well-dressed man sitting on the floor. Around 7 at night, an older gentleman who lived at the end of the corridor stopped beside him. "You've been here all day," he commented. "Yes," Mark replied. "Woman troubles, huh?" The man chuckled quietly. "It always is," Mark smiled faintly. "Something like that. Good luck, son. Sometimes we gotta be stubborn." And he went on his way. By 8, the door to 207 opened again. The girls, now in pajamas, looked at him with renewed surprise. "You haven't gone home?" June asked. "Not yet." "Aren't you tired of sitting?" Tessa asked. "A little," Mark admitted. "But it's worth it. Our mom is really stubborn," Tessa informed him almost as a warning. "I know," Mark smiled. "She always was." They watched him for a few more seconds. Then Nora spoke. "We're going to bed now." "Good night, then," Mark said. "Dream of good things." They went in and closed the door, but not before casting curious glances at the man who refused to give up. Mark remained there. 9 o'clock, 10, 11. The hallway was completely silent now. Most of the residents had settled in. His back hurt, his legs were numb, but he didn't move. Just after midnight, the door next to 207 opened and a young woman stepped out. She looked at Mark curiously. "Are you a friend of Anna's?" she asked in a low voice. "Yes," Mark replied, not wanting to go into detail. "Do you know her well?" "We're neighbors," the woman shrugged. "She keeps to herself, but her kids are adorable. It's a shame she's so sick." "Do you know what she has?" Mark tried, attempting not to sound too anxious. "Not exactly. She never talks about it, but I've seen the medicines she takes. They're strong and expensive." Mark nodded. "Does she have any help, family, friends?" The woman shook her head. "Just the girls. They act like little nurses, more responsible than children should ever have to be." It twisted Mark's heart. 6-year-olds shouldn't have that burden. "Thank you," he said, and the woman continued on her way. The night wore on. Mark checked the time. 1:15 a.m. He was exhausted, but he refused to sleep, not when he was so close. Then he heard the first sound. A dull thud from inside apartment 207. Mark straightened up, edge alert. Another sound, something falling. Then a scream. "Mommy!" He jumped to his feet, heart pounding. He banged on the door. "Anna? Girls, is everything okay?" No answer, just the sound of movement inside. Mark knocked again, harder. "Anna!" Suddenly, the door flew open. Tessa stood there, eyes wide with fear, tears streaming down her face. "He's still here," she shouted over her shoulder. "Mommy fell." Mark didn't hesitate. He stepped into the dimly lit apartment and saw Anna on the floor near the bathroom door. June and Nora were kneeling beside her, trying to wake her up. "Mom," June called, trembling. "Wake up, Mum." Mark knelt beside Anna. Her face was even paler than before, a thin layer of sweat on her forehead. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck to check her pulse. "She's breathing," he told the girls, trying to sound calm. "But we need to get her to the hospital." Without hesitation, Mark scooped Anna up into his arms. She was frighteningly light, as if she weighed nothing at all. He could feel her bones through the thin nightgown, and his heart constricted further. "Girls, grab coats and your mum's medications. We're going to the hospital." They obeyed immediately, moving around the cramped apartment with an efficiency that only came from practice. June found a bag and started stuffing medicine bottles inside. Nora grabbed a thin coat and draped it over Anna. Tessa picked up a small bag that looked like it contained important papers. "Ready?" Nora said after a few minutes. Mark nodded and headed for the door, still carrying Anna. The girls followed closely. "Call a car, now," he told Nora, who held his phone. She nodded and made the call, speaking to the taxi service with a surprisingly steady voice for a 6-year-old. They descended the stairs in silence, Mark focusing on not stumbling while holding Anna. She was still unconscious, and that worried him more every second. By the time they reached the building's entrance, the taxi was waiting. The driver gave them a strange look, a man carrying an unconscious woman, followed by 3 identical little girls. "St. Mary's Hospital," Mark said, carefully getting in while still holding Anna. "As fast as you can." The girls settled into the back seat, their eyes fixed on their mother. The driver nodded and pulled away. During the ride, Mark held Anna against his chest, feeling her fragile body with every curve and break. He couldn't believe the woman in his arms was the same strong, vibrant Anna he had once known. At one point, she stirred slightly and opened her eyes just a sliver. "Mark," her voice was barely audible. "I'm here," he answered, holding her hand. "Stay with me. Please." Her eyes closed again, but her fingers squeezed his ever so lightly, a small sign that, despite everything, she was still fighting. In the back seat, the girls watched in silence, their small faces etched with a concern no child should ever know. June clutched the bag of medicine tightly. Tessa kept her eyes on her mother, as if she could keep her alive by sheer will. Nora, always the most serious, always the strongest, held her sister's hands, projecting a confidence she didn't feel. Mark looked at these 3 little ones, his children, though they didn't yet know it, and silently promised he would always be there for them. He wouldn't leave, not this time, not. The taxi sped through the sleeping city toward the only hope they had now, medical help for Anna. On the way to the hospital, holding Anna's cold hand between his, Mark knew his life had changed forever. He was no longer just the billionaire tech mogul who had built an empire. He was the man who had found something infinitely more valuable, and who would do anything not to lose it again. The waiting room at St. Mary's Hospital was a limbo, neither heaven nor hell, just a space suspended in time where people waited for news that could change their lives forever. Mark sat in one of the blue plastic chairs, his back straight, eyes glued to the door the doctors would come through. Beside him, the triplets settled as best they could. Tessa rested her head on his right arm, nearly asleep. June fiddled distractedly with the hem of her shirt. Nora, as always, stayed alert, her gaze shifting between that same door and Mark's face. Morning had come. Anna had been rushed off for tests as soon as they arrived, hours ago. Mark used his name, influence, and credit card to ensure she got immediate attention. A nurse had suggested placing the girls in the social services area, but he firmly refused. "They stay with me," he had said, in a tone that allowed no argument, and so the 4 of them waited. Time dragged by. One nurse brought hot chocolate and crackers for the girls. A doctor appeared briefly to say Anna was stable but needed more tests. "Has she woken up?" June asked, her voice small. "Not yet, honey," the doctor answered kindly, "but she's breathing well, and that's a good sign." After the doctor left, Mark noticed the girls watching him. "What is it?" he asked, trying to smile. "Why are you doing all this?" Nora asked bluntly. Mark pondered for a moment. He didn't want to lie. "Because I care about your mother," he replied, "and about you." "But you barely know us," Nora insisted. Mark looked at the 3 identical faces. He didn't know how to tell them what he suspected, that they were his daughters, that it was actually his right to know them from birth. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "we care about people even if we don't know them very well." The girls seemed to think about that. "How are you going to pay for all this?" Tessa asked suddenly, glancing around at the well-equipped hospital. "Mom always says hospitals cost a lot of money." "Don't worry about that," Mark assured her. "I have the means. I can pay." Another set of exchanged looks. "Are you really rich?" June asked, with the directness typical of children. Mark couldn't help but smile. "Yes, I own a big company." "What kind of company?" Nora wanted to know. "Technology. Computers, phones, that sort of thing." "Cool," June said, sounding genuinely impressed. Their conversation was interrupted when the door opened and a middle-aged doctor entered. He wore that neutral expression medical professionals learn to maintain, but something in his eyes made Mark's heart tighten. "Mr. Sullivan?" the doctor called. "May we speak in private?" Mark glanced at the girls, uncertain. "They're Ms. Pierce's daughters," he explained. "Can they stay here?" The doctor nodded, and Mark stood, following him to a quieter corner of the room. How is she? He asked at once. The doctor drew a deep breath. We've stabilized the patient, but the situation is serious. We ran several tests and... He hesitated, choosing his words. Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Pierce has cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, in a fairly advanced stage. Mark felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Cancer. The word no one wants to hear. How advanced? He managed to ask. Stage 3, nearly 4. Multiple lymph nodes are affected, and the spleen is involved. The fainting was caused by severe anemia, likely from the disease and possibly worsened by inadequate medication. Inadequate medication? From the tox screen, it looks like she was taking strong painkillers, but not the specific treatment for her type of cancer. I assume she couldn't afford the proper treatment. Mark closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. Anna was dying, alone, without proper care, while he lived in his penthouse, oblivious to everything. What are her chances? He asked, opening his eyes again. The doctor hesitated. It's hard to say without more study, but with adequate treatment, about a 50% chance. Without treatment... He left the sentence unfinished. What is the proper treatment? A combination of intensive chemotherapy, possibly radiation therapy, and depending on the response, a stem cell transplant. It's a long, painful, exhausting process, but it's her best chance. Mark nodded, resolute. I want her to have the best possible care. A private room, the best medical team, the best medication. Money is no object. The doctor studied his face for a moment. Are you a relative of the patient? Not exactly. Mark hesitated. What was he to Anna now? Ex-boyfriend? Father of her children? A stranger? I'm family, he said at last, and I'll take care of her and the girls. The doctor nodded, seeming satisfied. All right, I'll arrange everything. Ms. Pierce is still unconscious, but she should wake in the next few hours. Once she's stable, we'll transfer her to a private room. And when can treatment start? As soon as she's strong enough, maybe in 2 or 3 days. Thank you, doctor. The doctor shook his hand and left. Mark stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. Anna had cancer. Advanced stage. 50% chance. Numbers and statistics that suddenly meant everything. When he returned to the girls, their anxious faces nearly made him break down. What did the doctor say? Nora asked immediately. Is Mom going to be okay? Mark sat back down among them. How to explain something so complicated and scary to 6-year-olds? Your mom is sick, he began carefully. It's called cancer. We know what cancer is, Nora said. Our neighbor died from it last year. Mark swallowed. Of course they knew. Children absorb everything, especially suffering. Your mom is going to start treatment, he continued. It will be hard and sometimes she might feel even worse before she feels better. But the doctors will do their best to help her. Is she gonna die? June asked bluntly, her big eyes full of fear. We're going to do everything possible so that doesn't happen, Mark said firmly. She'll have the best doctors, the best medicines. Promise, Tessa pressed. I promise. They seemed to accept that, at least for now. June rested her head on Mark's shoulder, and he felt a tightness in his chest. These children, his children, had already experienced more hardship than any 6-year-old should. The next few hours crawled by. A nurse brought more snacks. Another came to say Anna had been transferred to a private room but was still asleep. Mark and the girls were taken there. The room was spacious and well-equipped. Anna lay in the bed, so pale she almost blended with the white sheets. Tubes and monitors were attached to her, beeping softly. The girls rushed to the bed, looking at their mother with worried faces. Will she wake up soon? June asked the nurse. Yes, honey. She's just very tired right now. Night fell and Anna still hadn't fully regained consciousness. Sometimes she opened her eyes briefly, only to drift back into sleep, whether from the medication or sheer exhaustion. The girls finally succumbed to fatigue. Mark improvised beds from the reclining chairs in the room, covering them with blankets a nurse brought. June and Tessa fell asleep quickly, but Nora resisted, determined to keep watch over her mother. You need to sleep too, Mark said gently. I'm not sleepy, she insisted, though a yawn betrayed her. Mark smiled faintly. Your mom Won't be alone, I promise. Nora studied him with Anna's eyes, eyes that Mark now realized were the same shape as his. Are you going to vanish when she gets worse? She asked quietly, her voice intense. The question pierced Mark like a knife. This 6-year-old girl, his daughter, had learned to expect the worst from people, to expect that when things got really hard, everyone would leave. No, he answered firmly, looking straight into her eyes. I'm staying. Nora held his gaze for a long moment, as if trying to see the truth behind his words. Then she slowly nodded. Okay, she said simply, closing her eyes. Mark remained there, seated between Anna's bed, where she fought a terrible illness, and the chairs where his daughters slept. Daughters who still didn't know they were his. Daughters who had already learned not to trust adults' promises. I'm staying, he repeated softly, more to himself than anyone else. A promise, a vow. This time, he wouldn't walk away. This one is good, the realtor said, opening the door to yet another apartment. 3 bedrooms, fully equipped kitchen, secure building. And the best part, it's just 4 blocks from the hospital. Mark looked around. It was simple compared to his penthouse, but it was spacious and clean. Natural light poured through the large windows, illuminating the somewhat worn wood floors. What do you think? He asked the girls. They explored curiously. June opened and closed all the kitchen cabinets. Tessa checked the bedrooms. Nora peered out the window, evaluating the view. There's a bathtub, Tessa reported, returning to the living room. Mom always wanted a bathtub. Mark nodded, feeling the weight of those simple words. How many basic things had Anna wished for and couldn't have? You like it? He pressed. They looked at each other, that silent communication again. It's nice, June said at last. But isn't it really expensive? Mark almost smiled at a 6-year-old worrying about money. Don't worry about that, he assured her. We can stay here while your mom's in the hospital. More glances passed between them. Are we going to live with you? Nora asked bluntly. Without Mom? Just until she gets better, Mark replied. You can't stay on your own, and I promised I'd take care of you. It was a temporary arrangement they'd discussed with the doctors and a social worker. Anna would remain hospitalized for at least a few weeks to start chemotherapy. The girls needed a guardian, and Mark had volunteered immediately. The social worker wanted to place you with a foster family, he explained, but I thought it would be better if you stayed with me. That way, you can visit your mum every day. The girls seemed to consider his words. What about our stuff? Tessa asked. We can go back to the boarding house today, Mark said. Bring anything you want. After a few seconds, Nora nodded, apparently making the decision for all 3. Okay, Mark turned to the realtor. We'll take it. I can sign the lease right now. 2 hours later, Mark had the keys in hand and a 6-month lease. The realtor, impressed by how quickly the transaction was done and the advance payment, promised the final cleaning would be done that afternoon, so they could move in the next day. Mark took the girls back to the hospital to visit Anna. She was awake but weak, dark circles under her eyes. She smiled faintly when they ran in, jumping on the bed to hug her. Mark stayed back, giving them space. His relationship with Anna was still tense. She accepted his help but spoke little, avoiding being alone with him. We're going to live with Mark while you stay here, June announced, always direct. Anna looked at Mark, and he saw a mix of emotions in her eyes, gratitude, worry, and something else he couldn't identify. Just until you're out of the hospital, Mark assured her. It's an apartment near here. The girls can visit you every day. Anna closed her eyes for a moment and nodded. Thank you, she said simply. It was the first time she'd thanked him directly, and Mark felt it like a small victory. The next day, they moved in. Mark hired a small crew to pick up the girls' belongings from the boarding house. There wasn't much, as it all fit in a few boxes. Clothes, books, a few toys, and the few things of Anna's the girls insisted on bringing. Some books, a photo frame with a picture of the 4 of them, and the old comforter that still carried her scent. The first night was strange. The girls shared one of the bedrooms, insisting on sleeping together in the same bed, even though there were 3 beds available. Mark slept in another room, leaving the 3rd empty. the room that would be Anna's when she returned. The next morning presented the first challenge: breakfast. "How'd you like your milk?" he asked, standing in front of the brand new fridge, which was still mostly empty. "Mom makes coffee with milk for us," Tessa explained. "Coffee with milk? Aren't you a bit young for coffee?" Mark asked, surprised. "It's more milk than coffee," Nora clarified. "Just a little bit of coffee." Mark tried. He made the coffee too strong, then the milk too cold. The girls eyed the mugs with politely disappointed expressions. "It's different," June said diplomatically. Mark smiled. "I'll get better, I promise." The next challenge arose when he tried to brush June's hair, which was particularly tangled from the night. "Ouch," she complained when he pulled too hard. "Sorry," he said, clearly unsure how to proceed. "I've never brushed a kid's hair before." "You have to start at the ends," Tessa explained patiently, as if instructing a slow student, "and use detangling cream." "Cream? What cream?" "We didn't bring any," Nora said. "We ran out a while ago." Mark looked at the 3 heads of dark, tangled hair. "I guess we need to go shopping." The trip to the mall was eye-opening. The girls needed everything: new clothes, the ones they had were worn or too small, proper shoes, school supplies, Mark was already researching nearby schools, and specific hygiene products. Mark had never noticed how many different types of children's shampoo there were, or how many dress styles a 6-year-old might want to try on. Nora, ever practical, chose simple, durable clothing. Tessa liked colorful things with floral prints. June wanted anything that sparkled or had sequins. 3 identical sisters, 3 completely different personalities. "Do we really have to take all of this?" Mark asked, eyeing the overloaded cart. "No," Nora answered immediately, starting to put some items back on the shelves. Mark felt a pang in his chest. These children were used to hearing no, used to putting things back, used to wanting less, needing less. "Hey," he said gently, "I was joking. We can take whatever you want." June looked at him suspiciously. "Really? Really?" Even so, he noticed they continued to choose carefully, checking prices, opting for sale items. They had learned to live with little. In the following days, a routine settled in. Breakfast? Mark was getting better at making coffee with milk. A morning visit to Anna at the hospital, lunch at home, afternoon activities, drawing, reading, sometimes a movie, another visit to the hospital, dinner, bath, another challenge. He always got the water too hot or too cold, and bedtime. Mark learned how to do simple braids, to distinguish cries of pain from cries of frustration, and to know when a fight between sisters was serious or would blow over in 5 minutes. He learned Nora sometimes needed alone time. Tessa loved being read to, and June had nightmares almost every night. And the girls, and slowly, learned to trust him, not all at once, but in small incremental moments, like when Tessa asked if she could tape her drawings to the fridge, or when June let him check under the bed for monsters, or when Nora, for the first time, grabbed his hand as they crossed the street, without him offering it first. Visiting Anna was the highlight of their day. The chemotherapy had started, and she was getting weaker by the day, losing weight, losing her hair. But she fought to appear strong in front of her daughters. "Is she getting better?" Mark asked the doctor during one visit, while the girls were distracted with Anna. The doctor hesitated. "It's too early to say. The treatment is aggressive, and she's very debilitated. The next few weeks are critical." At night, after the girls fell asleep, Mark would sit in the living room and work on his laptop, managing his company remotely, delegating as much as possible, joining only the most crucial decisions. For the first time in years, work wasn't his priority. 2 weeks after the move, on an ordinary night, Mark was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he heard the girls talking in the living room. "Do you think Mom will get better?" Tessa's voice, low and worried. "Of course she will," June responded, though without her usual conviction. "The nurse said all her hair might fall out," Tessa went on. "She'll be sad." "Hair grows back," said Nora, always the voice of reason. "What matters is she gets well." Mark served the mac and cheese, one of the few dishes he could cook decently, and called them to dinner. They came running, apparently leaving the difficult conversation behind. During dinner, they chatted about simple things, the movie they'd watched earlier, the book Mark was reading to them at bedtime, the next day's hospital visit. Just as they were finishing, June suddenly asked, "If she dies, who are we going to stay with?" Silence fell heavily over the table. Mark felt his heart seize. All three watched him with those big eyes, waiting for an answer that could soothe their deepest fear. "Me," he answered without hesitation. They didn't reply. They just stared at him, processing that. But they also didn't say no. They didn't reject the idea, and for Mark that was enough at that moment. A few days later, while preparing lunch, his cooking skills were slowly improving, Tessa came into the kitchen for a glass of water. She stood, watching him chop carrots, looking thoughtful. "Sometimes Mom pretended she was okay," she said suddenly. "But we knew when she hadn't eaten dinner." Mark paused, turning to the girl. Tessa didn't meet his gaze. Her eyes were on the carrots on the cutting board. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. Tessa shrugged. She'd say she ate earlier, or that she wasn't hungry, but we knew. At that moment, June entered. "Knew what?" she asked, grabbing a raw carrot to munch on. "That Mom wouldn't eat so we could have food," Tessa replied. June nodded, as if it were a common fact of life. "She said love was enough," she added, chewing, "but when the roof leaked, it was hard to believe." Mark felt a knot in his throat. He looked at these two small girls, so familiar with sacrifice, lack, hardship. "The roof leaked?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "In our bedroom," Tessa explained. "There was a hole. We put buckets in, but sometimes it was too late. Mom asked the landlord many times to fix it," June chimed in, "but he never did." Mark nodded, unable to respond. The girls went on chatting about other problems from the old apartment. A faucet that sometimes didn't work, a stove with only one working burner, a shower that gave electric shocks. He listened silently, absorbing every detail of the difficult life Anna and the girls had led while he lived in luxury, oblivious. "I'm going to the bathroom," he said eventually, when he felt he couldn't hold back his emotions any longer. "Keep an eye on the carrots, please." In the bathroom, he locked the door and leaned against it. The tears came silently but powerfully. He cried for the lost time, for the hardships Anna had faced alone, for the girls who had learned too early what scarcity meant. He cried for the father he hadn't been, for the man who had abandoned the woman he loved in the name of comfort and social acceptance. Sitting on the bathroom floor, back against the door, Mark Sullivan, the billionaire CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the country, finally understood what truly mattered, and he silently vowed again to do everything differently from now on, for Anna, for the girls, and for the man he was finally learning to be. A month had passed since Anna began treatment. A month of highs and lows, of fragile hopes and deep fears. The doctors spoke of a moderately positive response, careful words none of them fully understood. The girls adapted to their new routine. They attended a nearby school and, after initial reluctance, started making friends. The social worker visited regularly, always leaving satisfied with the environment Mark was providing. One particular morning, the house was unusually quiet. The girls had gone to school, and Mark was working on his laptop at the kitchen table when the phone rang. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Nurse Teresa from St. Mary's Hospital." Mark's heart sped up. Calls from the hospital rarely brought good news. "Miss Pierce is asking for you," the nurse said. She urgently wants to talk." "I'm on my way," Mark said, already closing his laptop. The whole drive to the hospital, his mind raced through possibilities. Had Anna's condition worsened? Did she decide she didn't want his help anymore? Or was she reconsidering arrangements for the girls? When he reached her room, he found Anna sitting up in bed, paler and thinner than ever. The chemotherapy had taken most of her hair, now covered by a colorful scarf that June had picked out. But her eyes, those eyes Mark knew so well, were alert, determined. "Hey," he said from the doorway. "The nurse said you wanted to see me." Anna nodded slightly. "Have a seat," she said, indicating the chair beside the bed. Mark did as she asked, watching her carefully. Something was different today. A decision made, a wall finally starting to come down. "Are the girls okay?" she asked. "They're fine. They're at school right now. Nora won a math prize yesterday. Tessa takes art class twice a week. June joined the choir. Anna smiled faintly, and even exhausted, her face lit up at the mention of her daughters. They've never had so many opportunities before. Mark just nodded. He'd learned a lot in recent weeks about the difficult life Anna and the girls had led. Frequent moves as rent prices climbed. Various odd jobs Anna took besides her library work. Occasional help from neighbors when she was too ill to work. A life of constant struggle. While he built his empire. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but laden with meaning. There was so much to say, so many lost years, so many explanations owed. At last, Anna spoke, her voice weak but firm. "They're your daughters." Mark felt the impact of those words, even though he already knew in his heart they were true. He closed his eyes, letting the confirmation wash over him. "I always suspected," he said quietly. "But I didn't want to force you to say it." Anna watched him, searching his face. "Why didn't you ask outright?" Mark took a deep breath. "I guess I was afraid of the answer, afraid you'd deny it, or worse, confirm it. Then I'd have to face the reality of what I'd abandoned." Anna looked away, gazing out the window for a moment. Outside, the world went on, people coming and going, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that hospital room. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you, after we—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "After I let you walk away," Mark finished, unwilling to soften his own actions. Anna nodded. "I thought about telling you. I even went to your office once." Mark looked stunned. "I never knew that. I didn't get past reception." She gave a small, sad smile. "Your secretary looked me over and said you were in a meeting with important investors. Asked if I had an appointment." Mark closed his eyes again, imagining the scene. Anna, young and pregnant, gathering the courage to see him, only to be dismissed. "I'm so sorry," he said, knowing the words weren't enough. "That day, I decided I'd raise them alone," Anna continued. "I thought it would be better. You'd made your choice, and it wasn't a life with me." "I was an idiot," Mark muttered, his voice thick with regret. Anna extended her hand, surprising him by taking his, a gesture that hadn't happened since they reunited. "I never asked you for anything," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "No support, no acknowledgement, no help. I just didn't want them growing up thinking they weren't worth anything." Mark felt a lump in his throat. "How did you do it? How did you raise 3 daughters alone, on a librarian's salary?" "One day at a time," she replied simply, taking any extra job that came along, counting coins, learning to live with less. He recalled the girl's words. "Mum pretended she was okay, but we knew when she hadn't eaten." "You went hungry so they could eat," he murmured, not a question. Anna shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing. Any mother would do the same. Mark tightened his grip on her hand. "But no mother should have to—" Silence fell again, but it was no longer tense, rather a moment of mutual understanding, of truths finally spoken. "Now they have everything," Mark said, "and so do you, if you want." Anna gave a small smile. "They're happy with you. I never thought I'd say that, but it's true. When we come home from visits, they don't stop talking about what you did, what you said, how you do braids differently than me." Mark chuckled. "I'm still learning the whole braiding thing." "You seem to be doing well," Anna replied. Then, more seriously, "They need a father, Mark, especially now." Mark felt the weight of those words. Was Anna implying she might not be around much longer? "You're going to be fine," he insisted. "The doctors are optimistic." Anna didn't answer directly. She just looked at their joined hands. "I want to make it official," Mark said suddenly. "I want to acknowledge my paternity legally." Anna raised her eyes, surprised. "Are you sure?" "That's a big step. I've never been more sure of anything." The following days were intense. Mark hired the best attorney in the city to handle the paternity paperwork. Soon, he was officially recognized as Nora, Tessa, and June's father. They hadn't told the girls yet. Anna wanted to wait for the right moment when she was a bit stronger. Mark respected her decision, though he was anxious for his daughters to know the truth. 2 weeks later, Mark accompanied Anna for another chemotherapy session. The girls were at school, and the two of them were alone in the treatment room. Anna was hooked up to the equipment, the clear liquid of the medication dripping slowly through the tube into her veins. She looked even more fragile on treatment days, as though all her energy was being drained along with the cancer cells. "Why are you here?" she asked suddenly, breaking the long silence. Mark, checking emails on his phone, looked up, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Why are you doing all this?" she repeated, eyes fixed on him. "Taking care of the girls, paying for my treatment, sitting here through hours of chemo." Mark put his phone away, thinking carefully. "Because I care about you," he finally said. "And now I care about the girls too. They brought you back into my life." It was a simple answer, but genuine. In recent months, Mark had rediscovered what really mattered. Not the million-dollar contracts, the business headlines, the penthouse or the luxury cars. What mattered were those moments when June hugged him goodnight, when Tessa proudly showed off a new drawing, when Nora, always the most reserved, finally smiled at him. And yes, these moments with Anna, even in the hospital, even during difficult treatments. Anna turned her face toward the window, but not before Mark saw the tears she was trying to hold back. Without speaking, he reached out and took her hand. Anna didn't pull away, only squeezed his fingers lightly, as if she needed an anchor to steady herself in a storm of emotions, and they stayed that way in silence. No grand promises, no dramatic declarations, no plans for a future neither could predict. Just presence. The presence Mark had denied Anna 7 years ago, the presence he now offered, demanding nothing in return. "The girls want to cut their hair," Anna said after a long pause, her voice steadier. Mark smiled. "I know. They told me. They want it just like Mom's." "What do you think?" "I think you raised 3 amazing girls," he replied sincerely. "They're brave, supportive, strong like their mother." Anna looked at him, surprised. "Even after everything, you don't hate me?" Mark shook his head, shocked by the question. "Hate you? Why?" "For not telling you about the girls. For keeping them from you for 6 years." Mark thought for a moment. "At first, when I realized they were mine, I was shaken. I thought of everything I'd missed, their first steps, first words, so many moments I'll never get back." Anna lowered her eyes, guilt evident. "But then," he continued, "I started to see the situation from your side. You came to my office pregnant, and were treated like an intruder. You were alone with 3 babies on the way, and I'd made it clear through my actions that my career and social acceptance mattered more than our love." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "If anyone owes an apology, it's me, for being weak when you needed me to be strong, for choosing my family's approval over the family we could have had." Tears slid down Anna's face now. "And what about the future?" she asked softly. When I... "One thing at a time," he interrupted gently. "Right now, you need to focus on getting better. I'll be here for whatever you need." A nurse entered, breaking the moment, checking the machines and adjusting the drip before leaving them alone again. "Thank you," Anna said once the door closed, "for being here, for caring for them, for not giving up." Mark smiled. "I'll never give up on you again." "That's a promise." And when Anna drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the treatment, Mark stayed right there, holding her hand, holding on to the words they had finally spoken. Words that should have been said 7 years ago, but which still opened a path for some sort of future, whatever it might be. Spring arrived in full force. Days grew longer, the sun more present, and the trees in the park across from the apartment bloomed with bright flowers that fell like soft rain when the wind blew. It had been 3 months since Anna started treatment. The latest scans gave the doctors cautious optimism. Partial remission, they said, words that sounded like music to Mark's ears. After weeks of insistence, they finally allowed Anna to go home, provided she continued her regular hospital visits for chemo and tests. Coming home was celebrated like a victory, because it was won. Mark had converted the 3rd bedroom into a cozy space for her, an adjustable bed, soft armchairs, shelves filled with books, a large window that let in the morning sun. The girls had decorated the walls with drawings and "Welcome Home Mom" signs. In the first few days, Anna remained hesitant, still too weak to do much besides rest and enjoy her daughter's enthusiastic visits between their classes. Mark worked mostly from home, using a corner of the living room as his makeshift office, staying close in case she needed anything. Gradually, like a flower blooming after a harsh winter, Anna began to regain her strength. First, she managed to walk around the apartment unaided. Then she ventured into the kitchen to make some tea. Small victories everyone celebrated. One sunny Saturday morning, 2 weeks after returning home, Anna appeared in the living room wearing sweatpants and a light sweater, her colorful scarf carefully arranged over her head. "I want to go out," she announced, surprising everyone. "Just a quick walk in the park." The girls squealed with delight. Mark, concerned, asked, "Are you sure?" "Isn't it too soon?" Anna smiled. That smile Mark had rediscovered in recent months, which still had the power to light up his entire world. "The doctor said short walks are recommended, and it's too beautiful a day to stay cooped up inside." Mark couldn't argue. 15 minutes later, they were all ready. The excited triplets ran ahead in the hallway of the building. Anna walked slowly, leaning on Mark's arm. "Take it easy," he cautioned when they reached the street. "Relax, I won't collapse," she teased, but she did grip his arm a bit tighter. The park was full of life that morning. Families enjoying the good weather, kids playing ball, couples walking their dogs. A normal, everyday life that had once seemed impossible for them. They found a bench under a flowering tree, and Anna sat breathing in the fresh air. The girls asked to play in the small playground nearby. After making sure they were in sight, Mark let them go. "It's good to see them so happy," Anna said, watching the three run and laugh. Mark nodded, noticing how different they looked now compared to the scared children he'd met months ago. They were healthier, more relaxed, their eyes bright without the constant shadow of worry. "They're incredible," he said, "strong, like their mom." Anna smiled, leaning her head lightly on his shoulder, an easy gesture of closeness that had become more common. They hadn't labeled what they were to each other now. Ex-lovers, co-parents, friends, something more. They seemed to silently agree not to rush it, to let things unfold as Anna recovered. "You know what I miss?" she asked suddenly. "What?" "Seeing you paint." Mark looked at her, surprised. "Really?" "Yes. It was so beautiful to watch you completely absorbed, creating something out of nothing. Your eyes looked different, more alive." Mark hadn't painted in years. He'd stopped when he lost Anna, as if both belonged to a life he no longer had. The career, the success, the empire, those had replaced his art. "I'm not sure I even remember how," he admitted, with a small smile. "It's like riding a bike," Anna replied, "or you never forget." That casual conversation planted a seed that grew in the following days. Mark started researching painting supplies again, noticing colors in a different way, studying light and shadows like he once did. A week later, while Anna napped after another chemo session, Mark went out and bought a small easel, canvases, paints and brushes, everything he needed. He set up a little painting corner near the window in the living room, overlooking the park. When Anna discovered it, her eyes filled with tears. "You're going to paint again," she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I'm going to try," he answered simply. That afternoon, while the girls were at school and Anna dozed, Mark sat in front of the blank canvas for the first time in 7 years. He felt paralyzed at first, the brush awkward in his hand. But then, almost on its own, his hand began to move. Colors appeared. Shapes took form. When the girls came home, they found him still painting, so absorbed he hadn't noticed their arrival. "What's he doing?" June whispered. "Painting," Tessa answered, fascinated. Nora observed quietly for a moment, then declared, "It's the park. He's painting the park we went to." Mark finally noticed them and smiled, a bit embarrassed for being so lost in his work. "Can I see?" June asked, stepping forward cautiously. "Sure," Mark said, moving aside to reveal the work in progress. Indeed, it was the park with its blooming trees and the playground in the background, but in the foreground there were rough sketches of 4 female figures, 1 adult and 3 children. "That's us," Tessa exclaimed, delighted. "With Mom," Nora added. "It's not finished," Mark cautioned. "There's a lot left to do." "It's beautiful," June said, looking at him with a new kind of admiration. In the days that followed, a different kind of routine developed. Mark worked remotely in the mornings, cared for Anna and the girls in the afternoons, and painted at night after everyone had gone to bed. The painting of the park progressed, and new ones emerged, little studies, sketches, color experiments. Anna slowly regained her strength. Walks in the park became more frequent. Sometimes, she even managed to help prepare dinner, though she tired easily. Her hair began to grow back, fine dark strands that the girls touched reverently, as if they were magic. Life wasn't perfect. There were bad days, when chemo side effects were overwhelming, when exhaustion consumed Anna, when fear of the future loomed like a dark cloud. But there were also moments of pure, simple happiness none of them had known before. Like the afternoon Mark returned from a meeting at the office, one of the rare times he had to go in person, and found Anna and the girls around the kitchen table, surrounded by paper and crayons. "What are you doing?" he asked, setting his briefcase on the counter. "Drawing," June replied without looking up. "There's a school art contest," Anna explained with a smile. "The theme is my family." Mark felt warmth spread through his chest at that word, family. He quietly joined them at the table, watching their work. June was drawing everyone in superhero costumes, complete with colorful capes. Tessa's piece showed a detailed picnic scene in the park, impressive for a 6-year-old. Nora's, ever pragmatic, was simpler but powerful, 5 figures holding hands in front of a house. "5?" Mark asked, counting. Nora pointed to each figure. "Me, June, Tessa, Mom." Then, after a short hesitation, "And you?" Mark felt a lump in his throat. It was the first time the girls had openly shown that they considered him part of the family. That night, after the girls went to bed, Mark found Nora's drawing on the table. Examining it more closely, he noticed something he hadn't before. In the lower corner, in uneven childish letters, she had written, "Our family." Carefully, as though handling something incredibly precious, Mark took the drawing to his makeshift office and removed the photo from an old corporate frame. Nora's drawing fit perfectly in place, replacing the image of smiling executives. The next morning, when Anna saw the drawing framed on the living room wall, she paused, staring at it for a long time. Mark watched her from the hallway, quietly. He saw her gently trace the glass with her finger, outlining the 5 figures holding hands. He also saw her discreetly wipe away a tear. Summer arrived, bringing hot days and even more chances to be outdoors. The doctor had reduced Anna's chemotherapy sessions, still monitoring her closely. "You're responding well," he'd said at the last appointment, "but we have to be patient. Recoveries like yours take time." One particularly pleasant afternoon, Anna suggested they have a snack on the apartment balcony. It was a small space, but the sun hit it directly at that time of day. Mark arranged cushions on a lounge chair so she could be comfortable, and the girls brought sandwiches and juice they had prepared together. Anna sat down, and all 3 girls immediately tried to squeeze onto the chair with her. "Hey, careful," Mark laughed. "Don't squash your mum." "It's okay," Anna said, opening her arms. "Come on, my little ones." Somehow they all managed to fit, June and Tessa on one side, Nora on the other, each partly in Anna's lap, and she embraced them like a mother hen with her chicks. Mark took out his phone and snapped a photo, wanting to capture the moment forever. "You should paint this," Anna suggested, glancing at him over the girls' heads. "Maybe I will," he replied with a smile. The afternoon was calm. They ate, chatted, and laughed at the stories June invented about the passing clouds. At one point, Tessa and June slipped off to play with a few toys they'd brought. Nora, though, remained cuddled next to her mother, unusually quiet. "What is it, sweetheart?" Anna asked, running a hand over her hair. Nora shrugged. "Nothing. Something's bothering you," Anna prompted gently. "You can tell me." The girl hesitated, glancing quickly at Mark before looking down at her own lap. "What if you get sick again?" she finally asked in a barely audible voice. Anna pulled her closer. "I'm getting better, honey. The doctors are taking good care of me." "But what if it gets worse?" Nora insisted. "Last time you said you were better, then you couldn't even get out of bed." Mark's heart squeezed. This child, so young, already understood life's fragility. How promises can fail when things get really bad. "Hey," he said softly, scooting closer so he was eye level with Nora. "Your mum really is getting better this time. She has the best doctors, the best meds. Promise she won't—" Nora couldn't finish, tears welling up. "I can't promise nothing bad will happen," Mark replied honestly, "but I can promise that no matter what happens, you three will never be alone, never." Nora studied him with those serious eyes so like his own. "You'll stay with us forever?" she asked. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Forever." She seemed to consider it for a moment, then reached out and took Mark's hand. "Okay, Daddy." The world seemed to freeze. Daddy. She'd called him Daddy for the first time. The word came so naturally, as if it had always been there, just waiting to be spoken. Mark felt tears sting his eyes. He saw Anna watching him, her own emotions plain on her face. Nora didn't seem to notice the effect of her words. She continued talking, still holding his hand. "My teacher said there's a science fair next week. Will you help me with my project?" Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. "Of course," he managed. "Of course I will." Satisfied, Nora finally slid off the lounge chair to join her sisters. Mark stayed put, still processing what had just happened. Anna reached out and gently touched his face. "You all right?" He nodded, at a loss for words. When he finally could speak, he said, "She called me Daddy." "I heard," Anna smiled. "It was only a matter of time. They've considered you their dad for weeks. They just didn't know how to say it." Mark looked at the three girls playing on the little balcony. His daughters. Truly, legally, fully his. He sat on the edge of the lounge chair beside Anna, the two of them watching the kids in a peaceful silence. After a while, she said, "Now I can rest easy if something happens to me." Mark turned to her, alarmed. "Don't talk like that." Anna gave a small smile. "It's true, Mark. For years, my biggest fear was what would happen to them if I wasn't here. Who would take care of them, love them like I do?" She paused, looking at the girls. "But now they have you." There was such confidence in that simple statement, such certainty. Mark felt the weight and the honor of that responsibility. "You're going to be fine," he insisted, holding her hand. "We'll raise these girls together." Anna didn't reply, just squeezed his hand and kept her eyes on her daughters. In that moment, under the warm afternoon sun, Mark made another silent promise. He would never again be absent. Not from Anna, not from the girls. Never again would he let success, money, or others' expectations take him away from what truly mattered. He looked at the small balcony, the woman beside him, and the three girls playing, and he knew he had finally found where he belonged. The place he'd been searching for his whole life without knowing it. Not in a fancy office, not in a penthouse apartment, but here, with them, his family. He remembered Nora's drawing now framed on the living room wall. 5 figures holding hands, our family. And for the first time in a long while, Mark Sullivan felt truly at home. 4 full seasons had passed since that day on the sidewalk. A whole year of transformation, healing, and rebuilding. Fall had returned, painting the trees gold and red. The air was cooler, and the windows of the apartment were left slightly open, letting in a breeze scented with the season's first rains. They no longer lived in the rented apartment near the hospital. 2 months earlier, they'd moved to a house with a yard, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, a place with room for the girls to grow, with bedrooms for each, though they still preferred to sleep together most nights, and a studio for Mark to paint in. Anna had finished her treatment 3 months before. Complete remission, the doctors declared, though they remained cautious, reminding her she'd need regular follow-ups for years. She was still thinner than she'd been before the illness, and she tired more easily, but her color had returned, and her hair, now in a short cut Mark found particularly charming, was growing healthy again. The girls had just started 2nd grade. They were doing well, each in her own way. Nora remained serious and studious, reading well above her level. Tessa had discovered a special talent for music and had begun piano lessons. June charmed everyone with her outgoing personality and made friends with surprising ease. Mark had completely reorganized his professional life. He remained the principal shareholder of his company, but delegated the CEO role to his vice president. He worked mostly from home now, focusing on specific projects and long-term strategies, which allowed him to be present for his family. And he painted. Almost every day, at least for a few hours, he lost himself in his rediscovered passion. A few months earlier, he'd set up a small exhibition at a friend's gallery. Not a big deal, just a new beginning. The reviews were surprisingly positive, especially for someone who'd abandoned painting for so long. On this particular October afternoon, the house was quiet. The girls had gone shopping for Anna's birthday project with their grandmother, Mark's mother, who surprisingly had developed a genuine affection for her granddaughters once she got past the initial shock. He and Anna were alone, a rarity in their busy family life. Mark had just hung his latest painting on the living room wall. He stepped back, checking if it was level. "Perfect," Anna said, entering with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Mark and stood beside him, looking at the 2 paintings that now dominated the main wall of the living room. Side by side, the paintings told a story, a complete journey. The first, the old one Mark had painted at the very beginning, showed a young Anna sitting by the window of their old apartment. Sunlight fell softly on her face, illuminating the faint smile on her lips as she read. It was the same painting the girls had sold on the sidewalk, a painting Mark had painstakingly cleaned and restored, preserving every original brushstroke. The second, new and just finished, showed Anna and the girls in the yard of their new home. The 4 of them sat on the grass, surrounded by flowers, sharing laughter in a warm, intimate circle. Anna, her hair short now, had that same luminous expression as in the first painting, but with something extra, a depth, a strength forged by suffering and overcoming. Mark had worked on it for months, starting it in the old apartment and finishing it just the previous week. Every stroke had been placed with intent, love and reverence for the journey they'd all taken. "It's strange seeing them together like that," Anna said with a small sigh, "like 2 different lives." "They are, in a way," Mark agreed, sipping his tea, "but also parts of the same story." Anna reached out and touched the frame of the first painting. "I remember that day," she said with a nostalgic smile. "You asked me to stay still for just 5 minutes, and we ended up spending the whole afternoon there. I pretended to complain, but I actually loved watching you paint." "You were stunning that day," Mark replied. "Actually, you always were." Anna laughed softly. "Oh yes, especially in the mornings after an all-nighter studying, with huge dark circles and crazy bedhead." "Especially then," Mark insisted, and the affection in his voice warmed Anna's heart. They sat on the sofa, still gazing at the 2 paintings, their tea slowly cooling. "Back then," Anna said after a while, "if someone had told me we'd be here today like this, I'd never have believed it." Mark nodded. He wouldn't have believed it either. In those years of frantic ambition, if someone had said his greatest accomplishment would be this simple life with Anna and the girls, he would have laughed. "The girls are so happy here," Anna went on. "I've never seen them like this, so carefree the way children should be. They deserve it and more." Anna turned to him, her eyes searching his. "You came back," she said simply, echoing words she'd spoken before over the past year. But they always carried new meaning. Mark held her gaze. "Because I should have stayed." It was a truth they'd revisited many times during her recovery, his choices, what might have been, the responsibilities he had abandoned. "Sometimes I wonder," Anna hesitated, looking again at the paintings. "Did you really love me, Mark?" The question hung between them, delicate yet deeply important. It wasn't accusatory, just a genuine doubt from someone who'd lived with uncertainty for a long time. Mark set his cup on the coffee table and took Anna's hands in his. "I never stopped loving you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was just too slow to realize what that meant." Anna studied him for a moment, taking in his words. "What did it mean then?" Mark thought carefully. He wanted to give her the whole truth, not easy phrases. "It meant choosing you, even when it was hard. It meant putting our family above everything else. It meant having the courage to tell my parents, my colleagues, the whole world that you were what mattered, not what they thought." He paused, feeling the weight of past mistakes. "I didn't have that courage before. I took the easy path, where everyone applauded me, but I was completely empty inside. Anna squeezed his hands lightly. What about now? Now, he smiled. Now I know that real success isn't having your name in business magazines. It's Nora calling me Daddy for the first time. It's Tessa running to show me a new drawing. It's June snuggling up to me when she's scared. He looked into Anna's eyes. It's being here with you, after everything, and still seeing that same look I painted so long ago. Anna's eyes brimmed with tears. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, hands clasped, unspoken words passing between them. Over the past year, they had rebuilt their relationship step by step. First as co-parents, united for the girls' sake, then as friends, rediscovering each other's company. And slowly, very slowly, something deeper began to blossom. They still hadn't defined what they were now. They were learning to trust, to forgive, to begin again. But in recent months, their touches had become more frequent, their gazes longer, their late-night talks, after the girls were in bed, more intimate. Anna leaned in, softly pressing her lips to his. A simple, almost tentative kiss, but full of promise. When she pulled back, her eyes shone with something special. "Are we really doing this again?" she asked. Mark smiled. "We're doing something new," he said, "something better." The sound of laughter and running footsteps in the hallway interrupted the moment. The door opened, and the three girls burst in, carrying colorful bags, followed by Mark's mother, who looked a bit tired but was smiling. "Daddy, Mommy, don't look at what we bought," June shouted, dashing off to hide the bags. "It's a secret," Tessa added, running after her sister. Nora, more practical as always, turned to Grandma. "Can we start now?" Mark's mother, who insisted the girls call her Grandma Margaret, even before any official status for Mark and Anna, nodded wearily. "Let's head to the kitchen, then." "But you have to help me with this mess," she said, flashing a smile at Mark and Anna on the sofa and winking. "We're making an early birthday cake." The girls' idea. The triplets had already disappeared in the direction of the kitchen. Mark smiled at his mother. It still felt surreal that she, who'd once been so critical of Anna, now fully accepted her, along with the granddaughters. "Thank you for taking them out, Mom," he said. "They're my granddaughters," she answered simply, as if that explained everything. In a way it did. When they were alone again, Anna stood up, extending her hand to Mark. "Shall we see what they're up to?" Before he could reply, June called from the kitchen. "Daddy, the cake is ready." Mark laughed. "It can't be ready. They just got here." "Maybe the idea for the cake is ready," Anna suggested with a grin. "Daddy," June called again. "Come on." Mark rose, still holding Anna's hand. He glanced once more at the two paintings on the wall, the past and present side by side. "You know," he said, "there's still room for one more painting there." "Another one?" Anna raised an eyebrow. "Yes, one that shows all of us." Anna smiled, understanding. "Including you." Mark nodded, feeling a peace he'd never known before, a sense of belonging so deep it almost hurt. "Daddy!" the girls chorused from the kitchen. He smiled, giving Anna's hand a gentle squeeze before letting go. "I'm coming," he called, heading toward the kitchen, toward his daughters, toward the joyous chaos his life had become. Anna lingered a moment, watching him go. She saw how his shoulders were relaxed now, free of the weight he once carried. She saw how naturally he responded to Daddy, as if he'd been born for this role. She looked at the two paintings on the wall, the first, a reminder of what they had been, the second, a celebration of who they were now. And she thought of the third painting Mark had just mentioned, the one that would include everyone, because now, at last, Mark was no longer just the artist observing from the outside. He was part of the picture. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.